My mom let a woman burn my hands with industrial chemicals because Patricia can never know about us. When I finally asked her why she kept sending me back, she looked me dead in the eyes and whispered, "Just a little longer." I stayed silent. That was 19 years ago. This morning, she was standing outside my office in tears. When I was 4, I was enrolled into a daycare where I was the only non-white child. The daycare half a mile away had all my friends and I really wanted to go to it. But for some reason, my mom insisted I go to this one. At first, things were okay. I got called some bad names and other kids wouldn't play with me. But then about 1 month in, my teacher, Mrs. Grench, brought me into the bathroom. She got me down on my knees and took out a yellow bottle and sponge. She then unscrewed it and poured it all over the toilet bowl, telling me this was my punishment for being a dirty child. The smell was intoxicating, and I asked her what this bleach stuff was, but she just covered her own nose and ordered me to scrub. I remember the second my hand made contact with the liquid, I let out a scream. It burned my skin, and it started sizzling, but Mrs. Grench just grabbed my hand and pressed it into the toilet bowl, forcing me to scrub harder. I started bawling from the pain, but that didn't matter to Mrs. Grench. She kept me in the bathroom until the entire toilet had been scrubbed clean with my bare hands. I came out with literal steam coming off my hands, and when I sat down, Mrs. Grench made a joke to the whole class about how my fingers now looked like theirs did. What's even worse was that when I went home and told my mom, she seemed completely unbothered. She flat out said I was lying about what happened, and excused my discolored fingers as me not being careful with crayons. Ma'am, my skin was literally peeling. Either way, scrubbing the toilets became my daily routine. Every day after snack time, Mrs. Grench would take me to the bathroom while the other kids got to play. Even worse, she didn't just stick to bleach. She started bringing in stronger chemicals that made my eyes water just from opening them. My hands went from the skin peeling off to literally the red meat being visible. It got to a point even my mom could no longer deny it. She still didn't do anything though, just put some lotion on and said I must have sensitive skin. Things got much worse after Thanksgiving. Mrs. Grench's husband had missed it for work, and she started taking her frustration out on me. Soon, I was scrubbing toilets during lunch too, but now, the door was open while I did. Mrs. Grench started inviting my classmates to come and laugh at me while I scrubbed. Some of them tried, but the smell made them too dizzy to stick around. One girl named Emma actually offered to help me once, but Mrs. Grench stopped her and told her this was strictly my people's work. It was actually Emma's parents who became my first hope. They came in to pick her up early one Tuesday while the bathroom door was open. I was scrubbing with something new that made me throw up. Mrs. Grench was standing over me while I was getting sick, saying, "Dirty children do dirty work." Emma's mom saw it all. She gasped so loud Mrs. Grench spun around. I was too sick to see it, but apparently Emma's mom took her phone out and captured everything. She called my mom right there, who showed up 20 minutes later, but for some reason, she looked more annoyed than angry. Emma's mom showed her the pictures and demanded we go to the police, but my mom just kept saying, "I'm sure it's a misunderstanding," and "My daughter does have sensitive skin." Emma's mom stared at her like she had 3 heads. Well, a few days later, some man in a suit came to inspect the daycare. Mrs. Grench wore her nicest dress and gave him cookies. I was seated in the best chair, and as per Ms. Grench's instructions, had my hands in my pockets. The man barely looked at the bathroom before jotting something down and leaving. I found out later he was Mrs. Grench's husband. He ran something important in the town. After that, Mrs. Grench only got meaner. She made me use stuff that had skulls on the bottles. She'd say things like, "Some children are born to serve others," while I cleaned. My hands stopped healing between sessions. They just stayed raw all the time. I remember genuinely losing faith until one Christmas dinner when my teenage cousin Aisha saw my hands and almost cried. She was 16, my family's black sheep rebellious teenager, if you will, and she went to my mom immediately. Mom, of course, dismissed it, but Aisha refused to let it go. She started picking me up from the daycare herself sometimes, even paid my mom to let her babysit me. And it's during one of these babysitting sessions, she sewed something into my favorite teddy bear. She didn't tell me what it was, just hugged me and made me promise I would keep it with me at daycare at all times and hide it from mom. I trusted her completely. And 2 weeks later, Aisha came over to our house with her laptop looking serious. Turns out, she'd planted an audio recorder into the teddy bear. She had files from it on her laptop, and she played these recordings of Mrs. Grench saying horrible things to me. But instead of doing anything, my mom grabbed the laptop and screamed at Aisha, "You don't understand. I'll handle this myself." She then forcefully booted Aisha out. Within an hour, my mom was driving me to the daycare. She said she forgot something and needed to get it, but her hands were shaking the whole way there. She brought me in and told me to wait in the playroom while she got what she needed, but it was so dark, I got scared. I followed her down the hall and pushed open Mrs. Grench's office door. There, I saw my mom pressed against the same man who did the inspection. She was crying into his shoulder. "Just a little longer. Patricia can never know about us," he said to mom. My heart stopped. The words hung in the air like poison. Patricia, that was Mrs. Grench's first name. My 4-year-old brain struggled to process what I was seeing, but even I understood something was very wrong. My mom wasn't supposed to be hugging Mr. Grench like that. I must have made a noise because they both jerked apart. My mom's face went white when she saw me standing there. Mr. Grench straightened his tie and cleared his throat, but his eyes were cold as they landed on me. Without a word, he walked past me and out of the office. Mom grabbed my hand roughly and pulled me out of the daycare. She didn't speak during the entire drive home. Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and she kept checking the rearview mirror like someone was following us. When we got home, she sent me straight to my room. I sat on my bed, clutching my teddy bear with the hidden recorder Aisha had given me. My hands throbbed with fresh pain from that morning's cleaning session. The new chemical Mrs. Grench had used left blisters between my fingers that hadn't stopped weeping clear fluid. Downstairs, I heard Mom on the phone. Her voice was high and panicked. She kept saying things about handling it and keeping quiet. Then I heard Aisha's name mentioned, followed by angry words I couldn't quite make out. The next morning, Mom acted like nothing had happened. She made my favorite pancakes and even let me have extra syrup, but her smile was fake, and she kept glancing at her phone. When it was time for daycare, she hesitated at the door. At drop-off, Mrs. Grench was waiting. She and my mom exchanged a long look. Something passed between them that made my stomach hurt. Mrs. Grench's smile was sharper than usual when when she took my hand. That day was the worst yet. Mrs. Grench didn't wait until after snack time. She dragged me to the bathroom the moment my mom left. This time, she had 3 different bottles lined up on the floor. The skull symbols on them seemed bigger than before. She made me use all 3 chemicals at once. The fumes were so strong I couldn't breathe properly. My vision blurred, and I had to stop several times to throw up in the toilet I was cleaning. Mrs. Grench just stood there, arms crossed, telling me this was what happened to children who saw things they shouldn't. Emma tried to come check on me during lunch, but Mrs. Grench blocked the doorway. I heard Emma asking if I was okay, but Mrs. Grench sent her away. Through my tears and the chemical haze, I saw Mrs. Grench lock the bathroom door. We'd never been locked in before. She made me clean every surface in that bathroom. Not just the toilet, but the floor, the walls, even the mirror. My hands felt like they were on fire. The skin was coming off in sheets now, and I could see pink flesh underneath. When I tried to stop, she grabbed my wrists and forced my hands back into the bucket of chemicals. By the time she let me out, I could barely walk. My legs were shaky from kneeling so long, and my hands were swollen to twice their normal size. The other kids stared at me when I stumbled back to my seat. Emma looked like she was going to cry. Mrs. Grench announced to the class that I had been very naughty and needed extra cleaning duty. She said it loud enough for the parent picking up their child to hear. The parent glanced at me, but quickly looked away when they saw my hands. When Mom picked me up, she barely looked at me. She saw my hands, but just muttered something about getting stronger lotion. During the drive home, her phone rang constantly. She didn't answer it, but I could see Aisha's name on the screen each time. At home, Mom put me in front of the TV with a snack. She thought I was distracted, but I heard her on the phone in the kitchen. She was crying and saying things about no other choice and protecting everyone. When she mentioned Mr. Grench's name, her voice got quiet and scared. That night, I couldn't sleep. My hands hurt too much. I tried to hold my teddy bear, but even that soft fur felt like needles against my raw skin. I wondered if the recorder inside was still working, if it had captured what Mrs. Grench had said in the locked bathroom. The next few days followed the same pattern. Mom would drop me off with that fake smile. Mrs. Grench would drag me to the bathroom earlier and earlier. The chemicals got stronger. I'm trying to understand why the mom keeps sending her child back to this place when she clearly knows something terrible is happening. The sessions got longer. My hands stopped looking like hands at all, but something else was happening too. Mrs. Grench was getting careless. She started saying things about my mom, about how some women didn't know their place, about how some secrets were too dangerous to keep. She mentioned Mr. Grench's name a lot, always with a bitter edge to her voice. One afternoon, while I was scrubbing, she actually told me the whole story. She thought I was too young to understand, too focused on my pain to listen, but I heard every word. How she knew about my mom and her husband, how long it had been going on, how my mom thought she was so clever, but Patricia Grench wasn't stupid. She said she was going to make sure I suffered for what my mom was doing, that every burn on my hands was payment for every time her husband came home late, that every chemical I touched was punishment for every lie he told her. I wanted to tell her it wasn't my fault, but I couldn't speak through the fumes and the pain. I just kept scrubbing, my teddy bear watching from where I'd hidden it behind the toilet, hopefully recording everything. The bathroom sessions stretched longer each day. Mrs. Grench brought new bottles with different warning labels, mixing chemicals that made my nose bleed just from breathing near them. She watched me work with a strange satisfaction, muttering about unfaithful husbands and women who thought they were special. My hands had progressed beyond raw to something I couldn't describe. The flesh wept constantly, leaving wet marks on everything I touched. One morning, Mom dropped me off without even coming inside. She practically pushed me through the door and drove away before Mrs. Grench could approach her. I watched her car speed out of the parking lot through the window, my stomach sinking. Mrs. Grench noticed too. Her grip on my shoulder tightened as she steered me toward the bathroom. That session lasted through both snack time and story time. She had me clean the same spots over and over, pouring fresh chemicals each time I finished. My vision kept going dark at the edges. Twice I collapsed, but she pulled me back up by my shirt collar. The other children's voices drifted through the door, reading a book about farm animals while I scrubbed. Emma's mom started showing up more often. She would linger at pickup time, watching Mrs. Grench carefully. One afternoon, she brought Emma's dad, a tall man who frowned when he saw me shuffle past with my hands hidden in my pockets. They whispered together near the door, while Mrs. Grench pretended not to notice. The teddy bear stayed hidden behind the toilet during every session. I made sure to position it where it could hear everything. Mrs. Grench had started talking more freely, ranting about my mother while I worked. She described finding receipts from restaurants, mysterious phone calls, lipstick on her husband's collar. She knew exactly how long the affair had been happening. 2 years. Since before I was even enrolled at the daycare. My hands got so bad that I couldn't hold a crayon during art time. Mrs. Grench made me sit at my desk with my hands in my lap while the other kids drew pictures. Emma tried to slide me her extra crayons, but Mrs. Grench snatched them away. She announced to the class that I didn't deserve to make art because I couldn't even keep my hands clean. One particularly bad morning, the chemicals made me pass out completely. I woke up on the bathroom floor with Mrs. Grench splashing water on my face. She seemed annoyed rather than concerned. She made me finish cleaning even though I could barely see straight. My shirt was soaked with sweat and chemical splashes that had eaten small holes in the fabric. Mom started avoiding eye contact entirely during pickups. She would sign me out without speaking to anyone, grabbing my backpack with one hand and my wrist with the other. Her fingers always found the few spots that weren't completely destroyed, gripping just hard enough to steer me to the car. At home, she'd apply cream to my hands in silence, her jaw tight. The worst part was bedtime. I couldn't sleep on my stomach because putting pressure on my hands sent shooting pains up my arms. I couldn't sleep on my back because the air hitting the exposed flesh felt like tiny needles. I spent most nights sitting up in bed, my hands held carefully away from everything, counting the hours until morning. Aisha kept trying to visit, but Mom always had excuses. Too busy, not feeling well, maybe next week. I could hear their phone arguments from my room, Aisha's voice getting louder through the speaker, while Mom's responses got quieter. Once, I heard a car pull up late at night and saw Aisha's silhouette at our front door. Mom wouldn't let her in. They argued on the porch in harsh whispers until Aisha finally left. Mrs. Grench introduced a new chemical that came in a black bottle with no label. She poured it into a bucket it, and the fumes made my eyes stream instantly. When my skin touched it, the pain was different from the others. Instead of burning, it felt like ice, so cold it circled back around to burning. My hands turned white, then red, then a color I'd never seen skin turn before. Emma's parents weren't the only ones noticing anymore. Other parents started asking questions during pickup. They'd see me walking stiffly, my hands hidden, and exchange worried looks. Mrs. Grinch always had explanations ready. Sensitive skin, allergic reactions, overprotective parents making a fuss about nothing. Most parents accepted these answers and hurried their children out. One afternoon, while I was cleaning, Mrs. Grinch received a phone call. Her face went from angry to furious as she listened. She hung up and immediately dragged me out of the bathroom, not even letting me wash the chemicals off first. She deposited me in the main room and stormed into her office, slamming the door. Through the window, I could see her pacing, gesturing wildly as she made call after call. Mr. Grinch showed up an hour later. He and Mrs. Grinch disappeared into her office while the assistant teacher watched us. I could hear raised voices through the door, though I couldn't make out words. When they emerged, both their faces were flushed. Mr. Grinch left without looking at anyone, and Mrs. Grinch spent the rest of the day snapping at every child who made noise. The next morning, Mom's hands shook worse than usual during drop-off. She kept checking her phone and looking over her shoulder. When Mrs. Grinch appeared in the doorway, Mom actually stepped back. They stared at each other for a long moment before Mom practically ran back to her car. Mrs. Grinch's smile as she took my hand made my stomach hurt. That day's bathroom session was brutal. Mrs. Grinch mixed chemicals I'd never seen before, creating combinations that made the air itself feel poisonous. She had me clean the toilet, then the floor, then the toilet again. Each time I finished, she'd pour more chemicals and make me start over. She talked the entire time about betrayal, about women who destroyed families, about children who paid for their parents' sins. My body started doing strange things. My vision would go completely white for seconds at a time. My legs would give out without warning. Once, my nose started bleeding and wouldn't stop for 20 minutes. Mrs. Grinch just handed me paper towels and told me not to get blood on the floor I'd just cleaned. Emma tried to tell her parents what was happening, but she was 4 years old, trying to explain something she didn't understand. Her parents thought she was exaggerating, mixing up stories, having bad dreams. They did start documenting my condition though, taking photos when they thought no one was looking. Emma's mom had a whole folder on her phone. The teddy bear recorded everything, every rant about my mother, every threat about what would happen if the affair continued, every detail about Mr. Grinch's lies and late nights. Mrs. Grinch had no idea she was creating evidence with every word. She was too focused on hurting me to notice the small brown bear tucked behind the toilet. One evening, Mom got a call during dinner that made her drop her fork. She listened in silence, her face going pale, then gray. When she hung up, she stared at me for a long time. She opened her mouth several times like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. Finally, she just cleared the table and sent me to bed early. I found out later that Mr. Grinch had given her an ultimatum. End things, or he'd tell Mrs. Grinch everything. Make it all public. Destroy both families completely. Mom had begged for more time, but he was done waiting. He wanted a decision by the end of the week. The pressure showed in how Mom treated me. She'd swing between smothering attention and complete avoidance. One minute, she'd be examining my hands with tears in her eyes. The next, she'd be locked in her room making frantic phone calls. She stopped eating. She stopped sleeping. She looked almost as bad as I felt. Mrs. Grinch could sense something was ending. She got meaner, but also sloppier. She'd leave the bathroom door unlocked. She'd forget to check if other parents were around before dragging me away. She'd talk louder during her rants, not caring who might hear. It was like she wanted to get caught, wanted everything to explode. One morning, she made a mistake that changed everything. She was mixing chemicals in a large bucket, preparing for an especially long session, when she knocked over one of the bottles. The liquid splashed across her hands and arms. Her scream echoed through the entire daycare. She ran to the sink, shoving me aside, and turned the water on full blast, but I'd seen her skin already starting to bubble and peel. The assistant teacher rushed in and gasped at the scene. Mrs. Grinch with her arms under the water, me huddled in the corner with my destroyed hands visible, buckets of chemicals everywhere. Mrs. Grinch, discovering firsthand what those chemicals feel like, is what we call instant karma with a chemistry degree. Guess she forgot the first rule of evil daycare management. Always wear gloves when torturing toddlers. The assistant immediately called for help, while Mrs. Grinch shouted at her to stop overreacting, but it was too late. Other teachers came, then the director, then parents who were dropping off their children. Emma's mom pushed through the crowd and saw everything. The chemicals, my hands, Mrs. Grinch's burns, the locked bathroom that had become my torture chamber. This time, she didn't just take photos. She called emergency services right there, refusing to let anyone stop her. She held her phone high, live streaming everything to somewhere, making sure there would be records. Mrs. Grinch tried to explain, tried to spin the story, but her own burns undermined every excuse. How could my injuries be from sensitive skin when the same chemicals had just destroyed her hands? How could it be safe and supervised when she'd just accidentally hurt herself? The director's face went from confused to horrified as she started connecting dots. They wrapped Mrs. Grinch's arms and took her away in an ambulance. She kept insisting she was fine, that everyone was overreacting, but the paramedics ignored her. As they wheeled her out, she looked back at me with pure hatred. I knew this wasn't over. She'd be back, and she'd be angrier than ever. The director closed the daycare for the day and called all the parents. Mom arrived within minutes, her face a mask of false concern. She played the shocked parent perfectly, demanding answers, threatening action. But I saw her hands shaking as she signed me out. I saw her avoid looking at the director's eyes. I saw her relief that Mrs. Grinch was gone, even temporarily. At home, Mom broke down completely. She sobbed while treating my hands, apologizing over and over, but she still wouldn't say for what. She mentioned calling Aisha, getting help, making changes, but by bedtime, she'd convinced herself things would work out. Mrs. Grinch would recover. The daycare would reopen. Everything would go back to normal. Except Aisha had other plans. She showed up the next morning before Mom was even awake. She'd heard about the incident from Emma's mom, who'd sent her the live stream video. Aisha didn't knock. She used the spare key and came straight to my room. When she saw my hands in the morning light, without the dim evening shadows to soften soften them, she had to turn away. She bundled me up and carried me to her car before Mom could stop her. Mom ran out in her pajamas, screaming at Aisha to bring me back, but Aisha just locked the doors and drove away. She took me to her apartment near the college, a tiny space filled with textbooks and protest posters. She'd prepared everything, a special bed, soft blankets, medical supplies she'd bought with her grocery money. For 3 days, Aisha took care of me. She found a nursing student to help treat my hands properly. She documented every injury with professional photographs. She made copies of all the recordings from the teddy bear. She built a case that couldn't be ignored or explained away, and she did it all while fighting off Mom's increasingly desperate attempts to get me back. Mom tried everything. She called the police, but Aisha was family, and I was clearly injured. She threatened legal action, but Aisha had evidence of abuse. She begged and pleaded, but Aisha wouldn't budge. She even got Mr. Grench to call, but Aisha just recorded that conversation too, adding it to her growing pile of proof. On the 4th day, Aisha took me to meet with Emma's parents. They'd been building their own case, collecting testimonies from other parents who'd noticed things. Together, they had enough to ensure I'd never go back to that daycare. They had enough to ensure Mrs. Grench would never teach again. They had enough to protect me, but they needed one more thing. They needed Mom to admit what she knew, what she'd allowed, why she'd kept sending me back despite knowing what was happening. Emma's mom was gentle but firm as she laid out the evidence, the recordings, the photographs, the witness statements, the live stream video. Everything pointed to Mom knowing about the abuse and choosing her affair over my safety. Mom crumbled. She admitted everything in a flood of words. The affair, the threats, the deal she'd made with Mrs. Grench to keep things quiet, how she'd sacrificed my well-being for her relationship with Mr. Grench, how she'd convinced herself it wasn't that bad, that I was exaggerating, that it would end soon, how she'd chosen him over me every single day. The admission broke something in me. Even at 4 years old, I understood betrayal. I understood that my mother had known about my pain and chosen to allow it. I understood that every burn, every chemical, every moment of agony had been preventable. She'd had the power to stop it and chose not to. Aisha became my legal guardian that week. Mom signed the papers without fighting, perhaps relieved to be free of the responsibility she'd failed so spectacularly. Mr. Grench disappeared from our lives immediately, his own marriage destroyed by the scandal. Mrs. Grench recovered from her burns, but faced investigations that would end her teaching career. The daycare shut down permanently. Parents pulled their children out in droves once the truth spread. Emma's family led the charge, making sure everyone knew what had happened within those walls. The building stood empty for months, a reminder of how many adults had failed to protect one small child. My hands slowly began to heal under proper medical care. The scars would always be there, a map of every chemical burn and blister, but the pain faded. The flesh grew back. The wounds closed. It took months of treatment and therapy, but eventually I could hold things again without crying. Aisha transformed her life around taking care of me. She switched to night classes so she could be home during the day. She learned to cook kid-friendly meals. She painted her spare bedroom in bright colors and filled it with toys that didn't require fine motor skills. She became the mother I'd needed all along. Living with Aisha changed everything, but the battle wasn't over. Mrs. Grench returned to the daycare after her burns healed, angrier than before. She'd convinced the director that the accident was a fluke, that I'd somehow contaminated her chemicals. The daycare reopened within 2 weeks. Mom showed up at Aisha's apartment the same day, pounding on the door at midnight. Aisha wouldn't let her in, but Mom stood in the hallway screaming about kidnapping and legal rights. The neighbors called campus security, who escorted Mom away. She came back the next night and the next, each time more desperate. During one of these visits, Mom let something slip that made Aisha freeze. She mentioned that Mr. Grench had given her money, a lot of it, to keep quiet about everything. Not just the affair, but what Mrs. Grench was doing to me. The payments had been going on for months. Aisha started digging deeper. She spent her nights going through the recordings from my teddy bear, transcribing every word. She found patterns in Mrs. Grench's rants, mentions of other children who'd left the daycare suddenly, names that meant nothing to me, but made Aisha's face go dark. She tracked down 3 families. All had pulled their children from the daycare within the past 2 years. All had non-white children. All had moved away shortly after leaving. When Aisha called them, 2 hung up immediately. The third, a woman named Danny, broke down crying and agreed to meet. Danny's daughter had burns on her arms, not as bad as mine, but the same pattern, the same chemicals, the same Mrs. Grench standing over her, making her clean. They'd left after 6 weeks when Danny walked in during a session. Mrs. Grench had offered them money to stay quiet, but Danny had just grabbed her daughter and run. The meeting changed Aisha's approach. She stopped trying to build a legal case and started planning something different. She knew the system wouldn't help, not with Mr. Grench's connections, but she also knew that Mrs. Grench's power came from secrecy, from parents not talking to each other. Aisha created a simple flyer with facts. No accusations, just facts. The daycare's cleaning supply budget, the number of children who'd left suddenly, the average time non-white children stayed enrolled versus white children. She made hundreds of copies at the campus print shop. Early one morning, she took me with her to the daycare neighborhood. We walked from house to house, sliding flyers under doors, into mailboxes, onto car windshields. Every parent who might drop off a child that day would see it. Every neighbor who might recommend the daycare would know. By noon, parents were pulling their children out. Not all of them, but enough. Emma's mom stood in the parking lot showing other parents the photos she'd taken of my hands. Another parent mentioned their child's mysterious rashes. A third talked about behavioral changes they'd ignored. Mrs. Grench tried damage control. She held an emergency parent meeting, explaining about sensitive children and overreactions. But when she couldn't explain why the cleaning supplies were kept in the children's bathroom instead of a locked closet, parents started asking harder questions. Mr. Grench showed up to support his wife, but his presence made things worse. Parents recognized him as the inspector who'd cleared the daycare. They realized the conflict of interest. Emma's dad, the tall man who'd been documenting everything, asked directly why Mr. Grench had inspected his own wife's workplace. The meeting devolved into chaos. Parents demanded to see the bathroom where I'd been forced to clean. Mrs. Grench refused, saying it was a privacy issue. But Emma's mom had already gone to look. She came back pale, holding a bottle with a skull symbol that was sitting on the sink. More parents left that day, then more the next. Within a week, enrollment had dropped by half. The daycare couldn't afford to stay open with so few children. Mrs. Grench getting those chemicals on her own hands changes everything. Can't claim it's just sensitive skin anymore when the same stuff burns her too. Makes me wonder how long she's been telling herself these lies about safety while watching kids suffer from those exact same burns every single day. Mrs. Grench blamed everyone but herself, ranting to the remaining parents about conspiracies and jealous families trying to destroy her. Mom made one last attempt to get me back. She showed up at Aisha's apartment with official-looking papers, claiming she'd hired a lawyer. But when Aisha actually read them, they were just forms Mom had printed from the internet. She hadn't hired anyone. She couldn't afford to after Mr. Grench cut off the money. The confrontation was ugly. Mom grabbed my arm, trying to pull me away. Aisha blocked her. They struggled in the doorway while I pressed myself against the wall. A neighbor called the police, who separated them and took statements. When the officers saw my hands, still wrapped in bandages, they told Mom to leave. That night, Aisha's phone rang constantly. Mom, Mr. Grench, even Mrs. Grench called, each making different threats. Aisha recorded every call. She also called our grandmother, my mom's mother, who lived 3 states away. Grandma had no idea what had been happening. Grandma arrived 2 days later. She took one look at my hands and started crying. Then she turned on Mom with a fury I'd never seen. The argument lasted hours, with Grandma demanding answers Mom couldn't give. Why had she chosen a man over her child? How could she have let this happen? What kind of mother was she? Mom finally broke down and told the truth. Not just about the affair, but about why she'd enrolled me in that specific daycare. Mr. Grench had promised to leave his wife for her, but only if she proved her loyalty. Putting me in Patricia's class was the test. Letting Patricia hurt me was proof of Mom's commitment. The revelation destroyed our family. Grandma immediately supported Aisha's guardianship. Our aunts and uncles, once they learned the truth, cut Mom off completely. She'd chosen her relationship over her child's safety, and that was unforgivable in our family. The daycare closed permanently a month later, not because of legal action, but because no parents would enroll their children. Mrs. Grench tried to blame the closure on discrimination, but the community knew better. Emma's mom had made sure of that, sharing the evidence with every parent group in town. Mrs. Grench's marriage imploded publicly. She confronted Mr. Grench at his office, screaming about the affair in front of his colleagues. Security removed her, but the damage was done. His reputation, his authority, his carefully constructed life fell apart. He left town within weeks. Mom followed him. She packed up our old apartment and disappeared, chasing after a man who'd already moved on. She left no forwarding address, no phone number, just vanished from our lives as completely as if she'd never existed. I started kindergarten the next year at a new school across town. Aisha had researched every teacher, every policy, every cleaning product they used. She volunteered in my classroom twice a week, watching everything. My teacher, Mrs. Daney, was kind and patient, never commenting on my scarred hands or the way I flinched when anyone mentioned cleaning. Emma ended up in my class too. Her parents had specifically requested it, wanting her to have a friend she already knew. We became inseparable, bonding over blocks and story time. She never asked about my hands, just helped me when buttons or zippers were too difficult. The physical healing took years. Skin grafts for the worst areas, special creams to reduce scarring, occupational therapy to regain full movement. Aisha drove me to every appointment, held my hand through every procedure. She used her student loan money for treatments insurance wouldn't cover, but it was the invisible healing that took longer. The fear when I smelled certain cleaning products, the panic when bathroom doors closed, the nightmares where Mrs. Grench's face loomed over me. Aisha found a therapist who specialized in childhood trauma, an older woman named Dr. Alexandra, who never pushed too hard. By second grade, I could hold a pencil properly again. My handwriting was shaky, but legible. I still couldn't do things like tie shoes or braid hair, but I was learning. Emma's mom taught me tricks for managing with limited dexterity. Velcro shoes, magnetic buttons, adaptive tools that looked like regular school supplies. Aisha graduated college when I was 7. She got a job at a nonprofit that advocated for children's rights. Her experience with my case had shaped her career choice. She knew how systems failed children, how adults in power could destroy lives while facing no consequences. We moved to a bigger apartment, one where I had my own room instead of sleeping on Aisha's couch. She painted it purple, my favorite color, and filled it with books. Reading had become my escape, the one activity my hands could always manage. Turning pages was easier than holding a pencil. I never saw Mom again. She sent a birthday card once when I turned 8, with no return address. Inside, she'd written that she was sorry and that she loved me. Aisha asked if I wanted to keep it. I threw it in the trash. Love meant nothing without protection. Mrs. Grench tried to start over in another town. Aisha kept tabs on her, making sure she never worked with children again. Every time Patricia applied for a teaching position, anonymous packages would arrive at the school with documentation of what she'd done. The photos of my hands, the hospital records, the testimonies from other parents. By 4th grade, my scars had faded to white lines across my palms and fingers. They looked almost delicate, like lace gloves permanently etched on my skin. New classmates sometimes asked about them. I learned to say accident in a tone that stopped further questions. Aisha never married, never had biological children. She said I was enough, that raising me was her purpose, but I knew the truth. She'd sacrificed her youth for me, given up the carefree college experience to become a parent at 19. The guilt ate at me sometimes. When I was 12, we ran into Emma's family at a restaurant. Emma had grown tall, her blonde hair reaching her waist. She hugged me immediately, carefully, the way she always had. Her parents invited us to join them, and we spent the evening catching up. They'd never forgotten what happened. Emma's mom still had the photos on her phone, she said, just in case they were ever needed. That night, Aisha told me something she'd kept secret for years. The recordings from my teddy bear hadn't just captured Mrs. Grench's abuse. They'd also caught Mr. Grench visiting the daycare, discussing the affair with his wife, negotiating my suffering like a business deal. Both of them knew exactly what was happening. Both chose to continue. The revelation should have hurt, but mostly I felt validated. My 4-year-old instincts had been right. The adults who were supposed to protect me had all failed, except for Aisha. She'd been the only one who'd chosen me over everything else. High school brought new challenges. Dating was complicated when when holding hands hurt. Sports were impossible with limited grip strength, but I found my strengths too. Public speaking, where my scars made people listen. Writing, where keyboards were easier than pens. Advocacy, where my story could help others. Aisha walked me down the aisle at graduation, both of us crying. She'd raised me from a broken 4-year-old to a confident 18-year-old. The scars remained, would always remain, but they no longer defined me. They were just part of my story, evidence of survival rather than damage. I chose a college 3 hours away, close enough for weekend visits, but far enough to build my own life. Aisha helped me move into the dorms, fussing over every detail. She'd already researched every cleaning product the college used, ensuring none would trigger my memories. The night before I left, we sat in our apartment looking through photo albums, pictures of my healing hands at different stages, birthday parties where Aisha had adapted every activity so I could participate, school events where she'd cheered the loudest, 1,000 moments of the life she'd built for me from the ashes of betrayal. I thanked her for the 1,000th time. She hugged me, careful as always of my hands, and told me what she always said, that loving me had been the easiest choice she'd ever made, that watching me heal had healed something in her too, that we'd saved each other. College meant new people who didn't know my story. I could choose when to tell it, how much to share. Some days I wore gloves to hide the scars. Other days I let them show, refusing to be ashamed of what had been done to me. They were proof of survival, of Aisha's love, of a community that had eventually stood up for one small child. The memories still surfaced sometimes. The smell of bleach could send me spiraling. Locked bathroom doors made my heart race, but I had tools now, ways to cope that didn't involve hiding. I'd learned that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about moving forward, despite remembering. My story spread quietly through campus, not as gossip, but as inspiration. Other students with their own traumas found me, sharing their stories of survival and the people who'd saved them. We formed an informal support network, proving that broken children could grow into strong adults. I majored in social work, following Aisha's path. My advisor tried to discourage me, saying the field might be too triggering given my history, but I knew better. My scars made me more effective, not less. I could spot the signs others missed. I could connect with children who trusted no one else. During my junior year, I got a call that Mrs. Grench had died. Heart attack at 62, alone in her apartment. I felt nothing at first, then a strange sort of pity. She'd spent her life spreading poison and died surrounded by nothing but her own bitterness. Mr. Grench hadn't even attended the funeral. I graduated summa fluid laude with Aisha in the front row, crying and cheering. She'd taken the day off work, driven 3 hours to be there. Grandma came too, along with aunts and uncles who'd become my support system. The family mom had abandoned had wrapped around me instead. My first job was at a children's advocacy center. I worked with kids who'd experienced abuse, helping them navigate systems that often failed them. My scars were an asset there. Children who wouldn't talk to other adults would trace the white lines on my hands and whisper their own stories. One case hit particularly hard, a 3-year-old with chemical burns on her arms. Her daycare teacher claimed she'd gotten into cleaning supplies accidentally, but I recognized the pattern, the placement, the lies. I documented everything meticulously, the way Aisha had taught me. This time, the system worked. The teacher was arrested. The daycare shut down. The little girl went to live with relatives who cherished her. I attended every court hearing, my scarred hands visible as I testified about recognizing the signs. The defense attorney tried to claim bias, but the evidence was overwhelming. After the verdict, the girl's aunt hugged me, sobbing her thanks. She said my scars had saved her niece, that my survival had prevented another tragedy. I thought of 4-year-old me, scrubbing toilets while adults failed her, and felt something shift inside. The pain had led to purpose. I still see Aisha every Sunday. We have dinner at the apartment where she saved me, now filled with photos of both our accomplishments. She never says it, but I know she considers raising me her greatest achievement. I consider surviving to be mine. The scars remain, white lines that tell a story of betrayal and salvation. They ache sometimes, phantom pains from damage done decades ago, but mostly, they remind me of Aisha's fierce love, of Emma's quiet friendship, of a community that eventually said enough. They remind me that children can survive almost anything if just one person chooses them over everything else. That's it for this story. Like the video for more. Dude with Sunday dinners with Aisha, that apartment full of photos. I'm curious what conversations happen there now, what gets said, and what stays understood in silence.